So we'll begin today by welcoming Senator the Honourable Vishnu Dhanpaul.
Thank you very much, Hans, and good morning, everyone. This morning, I just want to go through a bit again on the budget, and I want to stay on message based on debate in the Parliament. And judging from the standing finance committee's debate in the Parliament, it is obvious that what we've been saying all along is that the budget will be derailed by the first quarter of next year. I'm going back to the first month of the calendar year, new calendar year. And why would the budget be derailed? I mean, it's something that I would not like to see. It has happened before. Budgets have been recalibrated after a month, 2 months, okay, and put back out. You have seen many times where ministries have been asked to cut their budgets by 10% and come back to the Ministry of Finance across the board 10%. But the budget is essentially based on some very dubious assumptions and some exceedingly creative accounting. And I'm just going to show you one, and I'm not going to go into the numbers because I want to pitch this again for the ordinary man in the street. And I'm not going to go into the oil prices. You're all aware of the oil prices and the gas prices significantly budgeted higher than projected for next year. But I just want to say this, and to put it in perspective. This country spends $4.5 billion a month on goods and services, transfers, etc., that you can't afford not to spend, $4.5 billion. You do a quick mathematics, and that equates to $54 billion a year. You cannot afford not to spend that $54 billion. As I keep saying, I'm staying on message. That's like transfers and subsidies, old age pensions, public assistance grant, etc., debt service, all the direct charges on the exchequer. You can't afford not to spend on that. So we are locked in at $54 billion a year. The budget has projected revenue at $55 billion. You understand what's the problem there? And with a $20 difference in the projected price of oil and the international projected price of oil, a $20 difference, US dollar difference. So you understand you don't have a lot of margin for error. So what is going to happen starting from this month, which is what we call, November is what we call a dry month at the Ministry of Finance. Starting from this month, the government is going to be cash trapped. The cash flow, they're going to have a cash flow problem starting from November. Okay? And you're going to see it. And there's a reason why public servants won't be paid on time, etc., etc. Cash flow issues, and it's going to just continue into the new fiscal year. So, one of the reasons why most people would suspect that the government inflated the oil price assumption, and although we're not really an oil province any longer, Stuart Young MP will tell you that we're more a gas province. But however, the price of oil still has a tremendous impact on total revenue. One of the basic assumptions is that the government wants access to the Heritage and Civilization Fund. And to do that, obviously, you inflate the projected price of oil as against what you expect to get from actual. And that triggers the withdrawal rules of the Heritage and Civilization Fund. Similarly, on the expenditure assumptions, as I said earlier, mandatory expenditure is $54 billion. But surprisingly, given all the discussions during the campaign, etc., and during the budget debate about having new revenue sources, etc., remember what the question? Where are you going to get the money from? And the government mentioned, well, we're going to get new revenue sources. However, when you have a PSIP of only $4.1 billion, a little above 4% of your GDP, there's not much you can do, because your public sector investment program is where you generate your economic growth, you generate your investment activity, this is where you expect your economic growth to take place. But your 4.1 billion cannot generate the additional revenue in the non-energy sector that the government is projecting. And I want to say a bit on the deficit, which is one of the most deceptive deficits I've ever seen in all my career at the Ministry of Finance. Not many years, just about 30-something. At 3.8 billion, or 2.17% of GDP, but it is more obvious not for what it includes, but what it doesn't include. And here what it does not include, that deficit, it doesn't include back pay of 10% for public servants. Does not include. It does not include the addition to recurrent expenditure when you pay the additional 10%. You see, that 4.5 billion I said that must be paid every month, it goes up by 200 million automatically from the time you make that 10% salary increase. Let me make it clear. As a former public servant, in fact, I probably still am a public servant, I want to make it clear that I have no problems with the public servants getting the increase in salary. But things must be put in place. It's not at the expense of the rest of the country, at the expense of the economy. I'm all for public servants getting increased. In fact, last time when they got the 14%, I negotiated the 14%. So it's not a matter of I am against public servants. I also used to be a member of the PSC. Right? So I cannot be accused of that. So what does it? So firstly, as I said, it doesn't include the back pay. It doesn't include the current expenditure for the salary increase. And for some inexplicable reason, I want you all to go and check. I said it during my debate. On page 110 of the draft estimates of head 19, you'll see a figure there, 7.675 billion. Last year, it was 12. That's debt servicing. And the previous year, it was 12. How could it fall so drastically by $5 billion in the face of an increasing debt stock? If your debt stock is increasing, your debt servicing must increase. And then, this is a figure that a lot of ministers of finance like to forget. And again, I'm grading the page on page 5, or the estimates of revenue. Okay? There's a figure there for VAT of $8.2 billion. That figure for VAT is not a net figure. It doesn't include arrears of $7.9 billion. Okay, so all of that is part of the deficit. And you know what it does not include also? That deficit does not include the employer's contribution to NIS. Not that additional that is going to come in into 2026, the 45% at the end of 2027, or at the beginning of 2027, I should say. And a bit on the financing. I want to direct you to page 67 of the estimates of revenue. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the estimates of revenue, what we call the yellow book, right? And the first thing is, why would we have a deficit? Why would the minister be projecting a deficit of $3.8 billion and a financing of almost $19 billion? Go with page 67, you see there, black and white. Domestic financing, $8.1 billion. External financing, $10.8. Why are you projecting $19 billion in financing for a deficit of $3.8 billion? That's the question. Is that creative accounting? Or is the true deficit really $19 billion? But you see, while that may be hidden nicely in the estimates, you can't hide from Standard & Poor's. You cannot hide from Moody's. Those guys calculated that already. Okay, they understand the books. You can't hide it from the Article 4 consultation of the IMF. You can't. And this is where the budget will be derailed. And as I said, I've seen a budget derail in the first quarter of the fiscal year. I've seen it being derailed in the second quarter of the fiscal year. And everything had to be recalibrated. So how they plan on, how does government plan on financing this deficit? Well, they'll have to come back to Parliament, because we are approaching the limit, or borrowing limit, and they lost all the headroom that they had between how much they could borrow and the limit of the legislated limit. So you can expect the government to come back to Parliament by about December for the latest, to ask for additional spending limit. And what is going to happen? From the time that amendment is introduced to increase the borrowing limit, downgrade. All right? Immediate downgrade from Standard & Poor's and Moody's. And the next thing that, for some inexplicable reason, I keep mentioning it all the time, but I don't know if the minister is worried about it. I don't know if the governor of the central bank is worried about it. I am certainly worried about it. I've been worried about it for a long time because it's given me a lot of sleepless nights at the Ministry of Finance. Are you aware that we have an exchequer account that is in deficit of by $50 billion? In other words, the minister cannot do anything with fiscal policy until that $50 billion is paid down. He cannot do anything with a lot of the accounts in that cash balances at the central bank have been mortgaged to this thing called the overdraft facility at the central bank. And it has built up over the years since 2009. Every time you run a fiscal deficit, that number builds up. The only way you could pay it down or pay it back is that you have to run fiscal surpluses to pay back into the central bank. For some strange reason, I'm not getting any feedback on that. That's $50 billion that is stifling fiscal policy. Can't do a thing about it. I'm not seeing it in the press. I'm not hearing about it in Parliament. I'm not hearing about it from the minister. I'm not hearing about it from the Honourable Prime Minister. So I don't know and you know what? You're not going to wake up one day and that $50 billion is just going to disappear. So I just want to look quickly now at just some of the, and they've been well ventilated in public, some of the fiscal measures, and try and put a stop to some of the confusion that's going on. A levy on the assets of commercial banks. Come on, folks. Commercial banks are already faced with a 35% corporation tax and a 6% insurance premium tax for the insurance companies. Obviously, that's going to be passed on to the consumer. I heard the minister saying something about, well, you know, change banks. If it's been passed on, if the fees have been passed on, you change banks. And interfere in banks, especially Republic and First Citizens. But the minister would not like to see a run on a bank. You don't want to see a run on a bank as a Minister of Finance. Second thing, the landlord business surcharge. Obviously, that's going to be passed on to tenants. That's a no-brainer. And the minister's response, move. Get rent somewhere else. It's going to be passed on to all tenants. The electricity surcharge. You know what's critical about this one? One of the main competitive advantages that we had in the Caribbean is on our, for our manufacturing sector, is that we had the input cost of electricity was so low that gave us such a large competitive advantage. And it's very possible that this electricity surcharge will eat into that competitive advantage. And will also be passed on to the consumer. Just quickly on a few others. This one is the one that my pet peeve, the NIFTRI, the National Investment Fund. When the National Investment Fund first came out, you remember the Honourable Prime Minister saying that it was a Ponzi scheme? All of a sudden there's a NIFTRI in this government's budget. Where did that come from? Where does Ponzi scheme come from? And the second thing is the agricultural incentives. Those agricultural incentives in the budget were already there. The agricultural sector is the most incentivized sector in Trinidad and Tobago. Go and check for yourself. The importation of foreign used cars, another pet peeve of mine. And you're importing older vehicles into the country. This is, and just the previous week before the budget, the minister is complaining about how he had to drive from Faizabad or something like that. And it was affecting productivity in the country with your level of traffic. But now you're importing older vehicles into the country. This country brings on about 30,000 vehicles every year onto the road network. But there's no net impact because vehicles are not coming off the network. And as I said in Parliament, I'm going to give people a suggestion to become very rich very quickly. Start a car crushing industry. So you can get cars off the street. We don't have that. There's no net impact. 30,000 vehicles a year. So just quickly, as I conclude, the budget has been silent on a few things. Nowhere to be found. First one, the net international reserves. Do you realize that since April of this year to August, and I'm going to quote the source, the data pack, page 20, the central bank's data pack on page 20, you're going to see end of April, we had 6.2 months of import cover at 5.2 billion US. At the end of August, we had 4.6 months. We had 4.6 billion reserves at 5.4 months of import cover. Where did that 675 million disappear in 5 months? Nothing. We heard nothing about that in the budget. They made a big hullabaloo about the 7% online tax. We're going to remove it. The 7% online tax still exists. The debt to GDP ratio, after this budget, the debt to GDP ratio is going to move from its current 83% to well into the 90s. Guaranteed. Well into the 90s. Now, I firmly believe it's not necessarily the size of the debt of our country. Huh? There are many industrialized first world countries that debt to GDP ratios are over 100%. It's just that it's the trajectory of the debt and your ability to repay. Do we have that ability to repay? Are we satisfied with the trajectory of the debt? That's for the population to answer. And finally, and again, quoting from the minister's document, the review of the economy, appendix 5, page 193, you will see a contraction in the economy is projected for the end of 2025. A contraction, first time in 3 years. And one final thing, what about the lowering of the corporation tax promised during the campaign? What happened to that? I have heard nothing about the lowering of the corporation tax. So just in conclusion, we are projecting here that the budget going to be recalibrated within the early in the new calendar year due to very, very dubious assumptions. I now pass you back to Hans.
Thank you very much, Senator Dhanpaul, for that very comprehensive look into the faults and flaws of the fiscal package for 2025-2026.